introduce Dr. Costa Samaras. Dr. Samaras is an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering and affiliated faculty in the Energy Science, Technology, and Policy program at Carnegie Mellon University. His research spans energy, climate change, automation, and defense analysis. Dr. Samaras analyzes how energy technology and infrastructure system design affect energy use and national security, resilience to climate change impacts, economic and equity outcomes, and life cycle environmental emissions and other externalities. Dr. Samaras regularly provides commentary to online print, radio, and television media, so you may have seen his articles in the New York Times, Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and other outlets. He has presented his research to senior appointed governmental leaders as well. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Samaras.
Thank you so much, Dr. Naughton, for that excellent introduction and very kind introduction. I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm going to talk about shaping the future of the U.S. transportation system under uncertainty from COVID-19. I'd like to thank the great graduate students that I work with, and specifically Abdullah Al-Arfaj, who is working on this topic with me, and Professor Mike Griffin. Next slide, please. Okay, since this is a session about pollution reduction, I'm going to start with a pollution control device from the 19th century. This is a boot scraper. And so with each horse producing about 15 to 30 pounds of manure per day, multiplied by hundreds of thousands of horses in a city, the boot scraper enabled you to remove, I don't know, 75%, 80% of this pollution from your shoes before you went into your home, right? But the transition to automobiles, albeit powered with leaded gasoline, solved this problem, but it introduced a lot of new ones. Next slide, please. Civil and environmental engineers, urban planners, and architects shaped the future. In a lot of places in the United States, this is our current legacy. Neighborhoods and livelihoods were bisected by concrete, and pollution has disproportionately and continuously affected communities of color. The next transportation system has to be different. Next slide. We have a huge challenge in decarbonizing transportation. Transportation is now the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. And within the transportation sector, emissions from cars and SUVs, that's the blue area here, is the largest source. The emissions from aviation is the red area, and the emissions from freight trucking, primarily from freight trucking, is in the yellow area here. All right, so what does this mean? Well, see, the dotted line there is an 80% reduction in transportation emissions. This means we're going to have to reduce emissions from all of these sectors below that line to get an 80% reduction in transportation emissions. But there's more. We don't need an 80% reduction. We need emissions to go to zero. We heard from Dr. Ivy that COVID-19 has reduced activity in electricity use, in transportation, in industrial output, and others. Even under the peak of COVID-19, transportation emissions were down by about 30 to 40%. A pandemic is the worst possible way to reduce emissions. And yet, even under a global lockdown, we still had only an emissions reduction of 30, 40%. So the question is now, what kind of system do we bounce back to? Auto sales are down. Some cities are investing in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, but there's been a shift away from public transit. These trends can affect the way that the future unfolds. Next slide, please. So what we're working on is modeling the broad range of plausible futures to understand and identify robust policy and infrastructure pathways for transportation decarbonization. All right, what does that mean? We can look at how this works for when travel changes, when technology changes, when the grid changes, when behavior changes, and really try to understand what are the targets within all of those that we need to hit to make sure that we're on track to decarbonizing transportation. One thing really stands out: how much we drive. The next transportation system needs to focus on equitable zero carbon mobility and a just transition while winding down the era of oil. Next slide, please. There are a lot of new technologies emerging in transportation, and we model the impact of a lot of these. automation in shipping, automation in passenger vehicles, micromobility. These technologies could improve the life cycle environmental outcomes. They could improve equity outcomes, or they could make all of these a lot worse. We don't have to wait and regret the next transportation system. We have the opportunity to shape it right now. We, as engineers, have an ethical responsibility to design a sustainable and equitable future for everyone so that we can look back with pride on this next phase of the transportation system. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the discussion.